Every human being, no matter how steady they appear on the outside, carries a storm within, a storm of thoughts, doubts, fears, and unfinished conversations that never make it past the mind. You could be surrounded by people, smiling, working, doing all the right things, and still feel like you're barely holding it together inside. And it's not because you're weak. It's because the world never taught you how to protect your mind. We learned how to chase goals, how to work harder, how to survive, but not how to be still, not how to let go, not how to think clearly when everything around us feels urgent, loud, and demanding. But what if the clarity you're searching for isn't something you find out there, but something you uncover within? What if peace isn't the absence of problems, but the presence of perspective? The Stoics believed that true power comes from mastering the self, especially the mind, that our thoughts, if left unchecked, become chains. But if we understand them, they become tools. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. Clear the clutter, quiet the noise, and help you finally focus not just on what matters, but on what frees you. If you're on a path toward mental clarity, inner strength, and becoming someone unshaken by the chaos of life, consider subscribing for your true self, because the mind you cultivate becomes the life you live. Most people walk through life believing every thought they have is true, that if it appears in their mind, it must mean something deep, something important, something real. But the truth is, your mind is not a courtroom, and your thoughts are not evidence. They are just noise, fragments, echoes of your past, your fears, your experiences. They sound like you because they've been with you so long. They use your voice because they've grown familiar with your patterns. But just because a thought comes dressed in your language doesn't mean it speaks your truth. You are not the thought. You are the one listening, the observer. And once you realize that, even for a second, something powerful happens. You stop being pulled around by every passing mental storm. You stop reacting to every fear as if it were a prophecy. You begin to see the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, something incredible lives: choice. You can choose not to follow the old storylines that only bring pain. You can choose to pause before spiraling. You can choose to not internalize someone else's rejection as your identity. This might sound simple, but it's where real change begins, because without that space, without that quiet awareness, you're trapped in a loop, reacting instead of responding, surviving instead of living. When you no longer confuse your thoughts for yourself, the entire mental battlefield shifts. You begin to observe instead of absorb. And that observation turns down the volume of the noise that's been running your life. Some people spend years trying to fix themselves when the only thing broken was the belief that their thoughts were facts. I'm not good enough. They don't care about me. I'll always be this way. These aren't truths. They're phrases your mind has repeated so often they started to feel like truths. But feelings aren't facts, and thoughts are not identities. You are not the anxiety that shows up in a crowd. You are not the memory that haunts you when you're alone. You are not the fear that whispers when you're about to try something new. You are the one who notices all of these, and in that noticing, you have the power to detach, to step back, to breathe. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That single idea can change a life, because it reminds you that you are not defined by your past, not shaped entirely by your trauma, not destined to carry the same pain forever. The thoughts that rise up from those wounds don't have to become the script you live by. They can float in and out, like passing clouds across the sky of your awareness, if you let them. But to do that, you must stop chasing them, stop arguing with them, stop fearing them. You have to learn to watch them, calmly, patiently, without judgment. Because only when you see your thoughts clearly can you respond wisely. It's not about controlling the mind like a machine. It's about observing it like a garden. Some weeds grow on their own, patterns you didn't ask for, beliefs you didn't choose. But once you see them, you can decide whether they belong, and little by little, you begin clearing space for something more intentional. Clarity isn't the absence of thought. It's the recognition that not all thoughts are worth your time. Peace isn't the silence of the mind. It's the discipline to not feed every passing impulse. And that discipline grows with awareness. At first, the noise will scream louder when you stop answering it. That's normal. That's withdrawal from mental habits that have dominated your inner world for years. But with time, silence returns. Not a silence that's empty, but one that's full of you, the real you, the you that isn't defined by every mood, every passing worry, every self-doubt, the you that remains when the storm passes. This isn't something that happens overnight, but even one moment of that space, even 1 second of seeing a thought without being consumed by it, is a victory. It's a crack in the wall, a place where light gets in. And the more often you create that space, the less you live on autopilot. You start catching yourself. You start making conscious decisions instead of emotional reactions. You begin to live your life, not just survive your thoughts. And that shift is everything. Because clarity doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from thinking less and noticing more. It comes from creating space between who you are and what your mind says you are. That space, that separation, is where your power lives. It's where your focus returns. It's where your energy stops being drained by what-if scenarios and starts being directed toward who you're becoming. That's when life begins to feel lighter. Not because the thoughts are gone, but because they no longer own you. So the next time your mind offers you a story that sounds painful, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, is this who I am, or is this just something I've heard so many times I started believing it? And then decide if it deserves your energy. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it's just noise. And now you're learning to hear it without becoming it. That's how clarity starts. Not by erasing the mind, but by rising above the noise. Awareness doesn't begin as some grand awakening. It begins quietly, often in a moment when you catch yourself thinking the same old thought you've thought 1,000 times before. But this time, you notice it. You don't react. You don't follow it down its usual spiral. You simply pause and observe, almost like you're watching someone else's life play across the screen of your mind. And in that subtle shift, something incredible happens. You stop being a participant in the noise and you become a witness. That space between thinking and observing is where awareness is born, not as a loud breakthrough, but as a gentle unfolding. And the more often you practice this, the more you just sit with your mind instead of trying to fix, fight, or flee from it, the more you start to see it for what it is, not a monster to fear, but a messenger to understand. At first, the thoughts still come, the doubts, the fears, the memories. But they hit differently. They don't knock you over like they used to, because you're not inside them anymore. You're next to them, watching, learning, noticing the timing, the triggers, the tone. You begin to see that certain thoughts only show up when you're tired. Others only visit when you're lonely or uncertain. Some belong to old stories you never chose, but you've been carrying them anyway. And suddenly you realize these aren't random. These are patterns, loops, scripts that have been playing for so long they became background noise. And now that you see them clearly, they start to lose their grip. What once felt like truth starts to feel like repetition. The thought that always tells you you're not enough, it no longer hits like a fact. It sounds like an echo, And like all echoes, it only survives if you keep shouting into the same cave. But you don't have to. You don't have to keep responding. Awareness means realizing you don't have to pick up every mental call that rings in your head. You can let it ring. You can let it pass. And in doing so, you weaken the chain that's held you in place. Still, awareness doesn't ask you to fight your thoughts. That's where many people get stuck, thinking that the goal is to silence the mind or erase the thought entirely. But the mind doesn't work like that. It's not about elimination, it's about illumination. What you bring into the light no longer has the same power over you, because when you watch something clearly, without running, without judging, you change your relationship to it. And that shift is the beginning of freedom. When you're unaware, those imagined realities feel urgent and real. Your body tenses, your breath shortens, you react. But when you're aware, you interrupt the cycle. You feel the tension and you trace it back. You question its origin. You realize that the thought you're stuck in today is just a cousin of the thought you had yesterday and the day before. And once you see the pattern, you're no longer inside it. You're standing above it. There's something empowering about realizing that you don't have to believe every thought that crosses your mind. Just because something feels familiar doesn't make it true. Just because a voice inside you says you're not healing fast enough, or doing enough, or being enough, doesn't mean it's right. Sometimes it's just noise from an old chapter that doesn't belong in the new one. And the more you observe without reacting, the more clearly you begin to separate what's actually happening from what your mind is projecting. It takes practice, though. You won't get it right every time. Some thoughts will still pull you in. Some memories will still grab you by the throat. But even in those moments, you can step back afterward and ask, what was really going on there? That question alone, gently asked, without judgment, is awareness. And with enough of those questions, the tangled knots in your mind start to loosen. You begin to recognize the storylines. Here's that fear of failure again. There's the part of me that hates silence. This is the voice that always shows up when I feel abandoned. And slowly, with presence and patience, you teach your mind a new response. Stillness. Not the forced kind, not the frozen kind, but the stillness that comes from seeing clearly, from not being dragged around by every mental impulse. Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And that reaction, that space between thought and response, is what awareness gives you. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't promise perfect peace, but it gives you the power to choose your next move. And over time, those choices add up. They become a path, a way forward, a way out of the mental fog that once felt endless. So if you've been feeling lost in your own head, if your thoughts feel like too much, too fast, too loud, start here. Not with control, not with resistance, but with attention. Just watch, just notice. Let your awareness do the work that effort never could. Because the mind begins to calm, not when you force it, but when you finally understand it. Some thoughts don't scream, they whisper. They sit quietly at the back of your mind, untouched, unnamed, but always present. You feel them in your chest before you recognize them in your head. You feel them when you're alone, when it's too quiet, when something small triggers something big. These thoughts don't linger because they're too powerful to overcome. They linger because they've never been brought into the light, never written down, never spoken aloud. They grow heavy not because they multiply, but because we carry them in silence. It's not always what we say that weighs us down. Sometimes it's everything we haven't said. And over time, that silence becomes its own kind of prison. We often think that ignoring a thought will make it disappear, but suppressed thoughts don't vanish. They root themselves deeper, They show up in our tension, in our exhaustion, in the way we overreact to things that shouldn't matter. You tell yourself you're just tired, or sensitive, or overwhelmed, but beneath that surface, something unspoken is asking to be heard, and the longer it's ignored, the heavier it becomes. It could be grief you never processed, anger you never admitted, or fear that was never named. You carry it like a secret, but your body remembers. Your nervous system holds it. Your focus scatters because part of your energy is always busy holding that door shut. The truth is, clarity isn't just about thinking positive. It's about being honest, truly honest, with yourself first. There's something transformative about putting the unsaid into words. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need to tell the world. But even whispering it to yourself, in the dark, in your journal, in the car when no one's around, can start to loosen the grip. Naming it is how you begin to reclaim it. You're not defined by what you've buried. You're defined by your willingness to face it. It's strange how we often fear our own truth more than the judgment of others. We keep parts of ourselves hidden, even from ourselves, as if not saying something makes it less real. But silence doesn't protect you. It just postpones the healing. And healing doesn't come from avoiding the storm. It comes from walking through it with open eyes. The Stoics didn't run from discomfort. They stepped into it with clarity and courage. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining." But this isn't about suppression. It's about confrontation. It's about realizing that what you refuse to confront owns a piece of you, and you deserve to be whole. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do isn't to fix the thought, but to let it speak, to give it room to breathe. Write it down, even if the words don't make sense. Let the sentence be messy. Let the feeling be incomplete. The act of writing is more than expression. It's excavation. You dig beneath the surface and uncover what's been quietly pulling your strings, what's been shaping your moods, your reactions, your distance from others. And once it's out of you, even just a little, there's room to breathe again. Other times the release comes through conversation. A single sentence shared with someone you trust can break years of inner tension. Not because they fix it for you, but because saying it out loud proves it no longer has to hide. There's a weight that lifts when you hear your own voice speak what your heart's been holding. It doesn't have to be eloquent. It doesn't have to be a speech. It just has to be real. The moment your truth becomes audible, it loses its power to silently hurt you. But even if you're not ready to speak it, you can still face it. Even a breath, a deep, honest breath, where you admit what you're feeling without spinning it into a story, is a step. Sometimes the body can release what the mind is still holding. Grief, anger, guilt, they're not just mental concepts. They live in the breath, in the shoulders, in the gut. And the more you allow space for them to rise and pass through, the lighter you feel. Not because they've vanished, but because you're no longer alone with them. You've met them, you've listened. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, but knowing isn't just a mental act. It's emotional, spiritual, energetic. It's learning to sit with the parts of yourself you once ran from and realizing they're not as terrifying as you imagined. They were just waiting for you to stop pretending they weren't there. Unspoken pain isolates. It makes you believe you're the only one struggling, the only one carrying something too heavy to name. But once you bring it into light, even a flicker, you realize how many others are carrying their own unspoken weight, and suddenly your pain connects you. It doesn't isolate you. And in that connection, a new kind of strength is born. A strength rooted in honesty, not performance. There's nothing weak about struggling. There's nothing broken about having something to say, but not knowing how. The struggle only becomes heavier when you convince yourself it needs to stay hidden. It doesn't. You are allowed to speak, to write, to feel, to let the thoughts that never found a voice finally be heard. Because until you do, they will keep whispering in the background, pulling your focus, dulling your clarity. But once you let them out, even imperfectly, they begin to lose their shape. What once felt like a storm becomes a passing cloud. What once felt like a wall becomes a doorway. And on the other side of that door, there is light. Not perfect peace, but space, breath, possibility, and most importantly, the freedom to move forward. There's a kind of pain that doesn't shout. It lingers, quiet and persistent. It's the ache of moments that should have ended long ago, but still live in your mind like they happened yesterday. You find yourself replaying the same conversations, the same mistakes, the same losses. Not because they deserve that space, but because part of you is still trying to rewrite them. You think if you revisit it just one more time, maybe you'll understand. Maybe you'll feel differently. Maybe it'll hurt less. But it doesn't. It never does. Because the past doesn't change. Only your relationship to it can. It's a strange thing we do, reopening old wounds as if we might find peace hidden somewhere inside them. But what we often find isn't healing. It's erosion. Every time we relive a painful moment, we tear it open again, hoping it will give us something new. It won't. The moment has already happened. The words were already said. The silence already fell. What remains is just the echo, and echoes can't harm you unless you mistake them for the present, unless you start living in response to a noise that no longer exists. You can't build focus in a mind full of ghosts. The brain, incredible as it is, can only hold so much attention at once. When you're constantly pulled back into past regrets, there's little energy left for clarity. You can't be fully present when you're emotionally anchored to something behind you. The irony is, most of the things we fixate on can't be changed, and yet they consume us. They blur the present. They make it hard to see what's right in front of us. You're not really stuck because of what happened. You're stuck because you haven't let go of what never gave you peace. Letting go doesn't mean you pretend it didn't matter. It means you stop giving it the power to define you. You stop trying to harvest new meaning from a season that already passed. You allow the wound to close, not because it wasn't deep, but because you deserve to stop bleeding. And that decision, that choice to release, is often the first real step toward mental freedom. Epictetus said, "People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them." It's not what happened, it's how tightly you continue to grip it that causes the suffering. Sometimes we hold on because we think it protects us, that if we remember the pain, we won't make the same mistake. But memory isn't protection, awareness is. You don't need to carry the full weight of the past to learn from it. You don't need to relive it to honor the lesson. And you definitely don't need to let it run your life from the shadows. Forgiveness, especially of yourself, is not a weakness. It's not a soft option, it's a discipline. It takes strength to say, "I did the best I could with what I knew then, and now I choose to move forward." Forgiveness of others, too, isn't about them deserving it. Some people won't understand the damage they caused. Some will never change. But if you carry their actions like a bag of stones everywhere you go, they still control you. Forgiveness isn't a gift to them. It's a release for you. It's how you tell your mind, you don't have to carry this anymore. You release the echo so you can hear your own voice again, the one buried beneath all the noise. Because clarity can't grow where resentment has rooted itself deep. Some will argue that letting go is just avoidance, but true release isn't denial. It's confrontation without attachment. It's looking at the memory, honoring it, and deciding not to let it consume another hour of your life. It's stepping out of the mental loop that tells you if you keep thinking about it, you'll find something new. You won't. what you'll find is fatigue, paralysis, disconnection from the present, and maybe worst of all, you'll miss the life that's trying to bloom because you're too focused on what already withered. You have to ask yourself, how much longer are you willing to let yesterday ruin today? How much longer will you keep trading your peace for pain that's already been paid? Letting go isn't erasing the past. It's rewriting your relationship with it. It's learning to look back and feel something different, not because the past changed, but because you did. And in that shift, in that inner decision to stop bleeding from the same wound, focus returns, energy returns, life returns. And it's not always a grand moment. Sometimes letting go is subtle. A thought comes up and you breathe instead of engage. A memory resurfaces and you choose to observe it instead of relive it. You start speaking more kindly to yourself. You stop telling the same story over and over. And one day you realize it's not heavy anymore. It's not gone, but it's no longer holding you. So when the mind starts to echo, pause. Recognize it. Remind yourself, this is not the present. This is not your identity. This is just a thought, not a life sentence. You've already walked through the fire. You don't have to keep sitting in the smoke. Let the echo fade and listen to what's here now. The breath, the stillness, the chance to begin again. Clear, focused, and free. There's a voice that follows you, not outside but inside. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It sounds like your own thoughts, your own words, your own judgment, and that's what makes it so convincing. It says things like, you're falling behind, you should have done more, you'll never get this right. It tells you to try harder, but never lets you rest. It pushes you forward, but never lets you feel enough. And while it might wear the mask of motivation, underneath it is fear. The fear of being left behind, of being rejected, of not measuring up to some impossible standard you never consciously agreed to. That voice doesn't come from nowhere. It's built from years of comparison, perfectionism, and unmet expectations. It learned its lines from school systems, social media, critical family members, and your own patterns of self-doubt. Over time, it became automatic, so automatic that you stopped questioning it. You just listened, and the more you listened, the more it shaped your choices. You stopped taking risks. You started shrinking. You began to believe that maybe that voice is the real you, but it's not. It's just a script, one that was written without your permission and can be rewritten at any time. The thing is, you don't silence that voice by yelling at it. You don't win by arguing. That only gives it more power, more airtime. You silence it by proving it wrong, not with grand victories, but with small, quiet acts of courage. By showing up on days when everything feels messy. By taking one more step when the voice says you'll fail anyway. By choosing to believe that progress matters more than perfection. Because perfection is a lie the inner critic uses to keep you frozen. If it can convince you that anything less than flawless is failure, it wins. But the moment you choose motion over mastery, you start starving that voice. You don't need to wait for the voice to go away to begin. You begin with it present. And in doing so, you chip away at its authority. Every time you show up despite the fear, despite the doubt, you create evidence, real, lived proof that the voice isn't telling the full story. And the more evidence you gather, the quieter it becomes. Not because it's gone, but because you're no longer giving it your full attention. Your focus shifts. You start listening to a new voice, the one rooted in experience, not fear. That new voice won't be perfect either. It may still hesitate, but it will feel different. It will feel like kindness, like clarity, like you finally have your own back. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and maybe that's why the inner critic exists, to keep us from doing that." Because once you accept yourself, not just the good, but the flaws, the mess, the unfinished parts, you become unshakable. The critic loses its leverage when there's nothing left to shame. Of course, the voice will still try. It will come back when you're tired, when you're stretched thin, when you fail or fall short. It will say, "See, you never changed, but you'll know better now." You'll know that failure doesn't define you, it informs you. You'll know that one bad day doesn't undo the steps you've taken, and in that knowing, there's peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from trusting yourself, even when things aren't. You don't owe that voice a single explanation. You don't have to justify your pace or your growth to anyone, especially not the version of you that was shaped by fear. What matters is how you show up now. What matters is that you keep choosing to try, to learn, to care, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because every time you do, you prove something important, that you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who chooses what to do next. Seneca said, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that's what the inner critic does best. It builds imagined fears and dresses them up as truth. But once you see that, once you realize how much of your pain was built on stories that were never real, you begin to reclaim your power. You begin to live, not just survive. You begin to create, speak, try, and grow. Not because the voice disappeared, but because it no longer defines what you do with your day. And that's the point. Not to erase the critic, but to starve it. To stop feeding it your energy, your time, your belief. To create a life where your actions speak louder than the noise. A life where your worth isn't measured by perfection, but by presence, by effort, by intention. The voice may always be there like static in the background, but you don't have to tune in. You can choose what channel you listen to, and that choice, made day after day, becomes your freedom. Not all at once, but steadily, quietly, powerfully. You could sit in the most peaceful place on earth, no traffic, no noise, no deadlines, no demands, and still feel like you're drowning. Because stillness has never been about silence on the outside. It's about silence on the inside. And that's much harder to find. Your surroundings could be calm, but if your mind is racing, if your thoughts are shouting over one another, if you're stuck in the loop of what if and what was, then even the quietest place becomes loud. That's the trap most people fall into. They chase external peace, believing it will calm the storm within. But peace isn't something you stumble across. It's something you practice. Stillness, real stillness, isn't accidental. It's intentional. It doesn't show up when everything is finally perfect. It shows up when you learn to stop needing everything to be perfect in the first place. You don't find it in silence, you create it. You create it by learning how to sit with yourself, not to run, not to distract, not to fix, but to be. And that's where things start to shift. Because when you stop trying to escape your mind, you finally give yourself the chance to understand it. We live in a world that glorifies movement. We've been conditioned to believe that doing more means being more. So when we pause, even briefly, we feel guilty, unproductive, behind. But what if the most valuable thing you could do is nothing at all? Not in the sense of laziness or indifference, but in the sense of presence, real, rooted presence, sitting still, breathing slowly, noticing your thoughts without chasing them. That's not avoidance, that's courage, that's awareness, that's mastery, and it doesn't come easily. The moment you sit in stillness, your mind will try to fill the space. Old memories, tasks left undone, fears you buried long ago, they'll all rise. And that's the point. Stillness is not about avoiding the noise, it's about facing it without flinching. You sit with what shows up, and instead of running, you listen, not to judge, not to react, but to understand. This is the kind of stillness that changes people, the kind that strengthens you from the inside out. Seneca once wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future." And it's in stillness that we finally learn what that means. Because when you're still, the future loses its grip. You stop living for tomorrow. You stop reliving yesterday, and you begin to experience the only moment you've ever actually had. This one. The breath you're taking right now, the sensation of being alive, without needing to do or fix or prove anything. But it takes practice. You have to return to it daily, not as a task to complete, but as a gift you give yourself. 5 minutes. 10. No music, no scrolling, no stimulation. Just breath, just awareness. And in that small window of time, your nervous system begins to reset. Your thoughts begin to slow. You start seeing clearly what stress had made blurry. And over time, that clarity follows you into your life, into your conversations, into your choices. You become less reactive, more present, more centered. Stillness becomes a compass, a quiet reminder that you are not your impulses, that you don't have to answer every thought, that you don't have to rush every moment. When you carry stillness within you, chaos doesn't shake you the same way. You might still face pressure, uncertainty, even loss, but instead of being thrown by it, you respond to it with presence, with patience, with power, because your sense of peace no longer depends on what happens around you. It lives within you. Carl Jung believed that silence is of great help to a man who is in process of discovering something in his soul. And that's what stillness truly is, a mirror, a chance to see yourself without distraction, without noise, without the masks. And what you find there isn't always comfortable, but it's real. And from that realness, growth begins. Most people never give themselves that chance. They fill every empty space with something. They're afraid of boredom, but what they're really afraid of is meeting themselves. Afraid of the questions that might rise, the truths that might surface. But until you face those things, they quietly control you. They live in your decisions, in your relationships, in your distractions. Stillness isn't just peace, it's power, because it brings everything hidden into the light. And when you know yourself deeply, when you've sat in stillness and faced your own mind, the world outside feels less threatening. You become less desperate for noise, less addicted to stimulation, less pulled by every problem, because you've already stood in the center of the storm and learned to breathe. You've built something solid inside, something no one can give you and no one can take away. So give yourself that time. Not someday, not when you've finished everything else, but now. A few moments, a quiet corner, a deep breath. Let your thoughts rise. Let your body relax. Let your mind settle, not by force, but by patience. And in that space, you'll find more than peace. You'll find yourself. Not the version shaped by stress or expectation, but the one that's always been there, waiting to be heard. Stillness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. In a world that never stops moving, stillness is how you remember who you are. And from that memory, you begin to live, not in reaction, but in alignment. Not in noise, but in clarity. Not in fear, but in truth. Your mind doesn't just record what you experience, it builds your reality from it. And the raw material it uses most often isn't truth, it's attention. Whatever you consistently look at, whether it's peace or pain, fear or gratitude, your mind begins to shape itself around it. It doesn't judge what's useful or destructive, it simply adapts. That's the strange power of attention. It's quiet, it's subtle, but it's the architect of your inner world. And once you begin to understand that, you realize that mental clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from looking in the right direction. If you constantly focus on what's broken, what's missing, what's wrong, your mind will become an expert at finding more of it. Not because that's all that exists, but because that's what you've trained it to recognize. The brain is highly responsive. It builds pathways based on repetition. Focus becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. And identity, over time, becomes the filter through which you see every experience. That's why some people always seem lost in their problems. It's not because their life is worse. It's because their attention is trained on what's hurting, but the same mechanism works in your favor too. Shift the focus even slightly toward what's healing, toward what's working, toward small, quiet moments of meaning, and you begin to build new mental roads. You start noticing things you once overlooked, your breath slowing, the kindness in someone's eyes, the small victories you never counted before. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending life is perfect. It's about choosing what deserves your attention, because not everything does. You don't need to force positive thinking. You don't need to fight the negative. You only need to redirect. Slowly, gently, deliberately. There's a difference, and when you practice that redirection daily, even for a few minutes, you start to reclaim your energy. Because attention is energy, and where it goes, your life begins to follow. You don't need all the answers to take the next step. You just need the courage to begin, exactly as you are, right where you are, because clarity isn't something you wait for, it's something you earn by moving through the fog. Most people think self-respect means standing up to toxic people, matching their energy, proving you won't be disrespected, fighting fire with fire. So they yell when yelled at, they push back harder, they let their pride lead the way, convinced that retaliation is strength. But tell me, have you ever walked away from one of those moments and felt empty, like something in you cracked, even though you won? That's because every time you mirror their chaos, you abandon yourself. You become what they are, not who you are. And that burns. It tears at your integrity. The real war isn't between you and them. It's between your higher self and your need to be right. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it a name. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." True self-respect isn't loud. It's silent. It's calm. It's the ability to walk away with your peace intact, knowing you didn't trade your dignity for a cheap win. It always starts small, a half smirk, a veiled comment, a silence that feels louder than words. And before you even know what hit you, your mind's already busy, turning the moment over like a stone in your hand, looking for cracks. Did I sound stupid? Should I have said something different? Were they right about me? That's how it begins, the slow erosion of your self-respect. Not by their words, but by your belief that their words matter more than your own inner knowing. We live in a world where people are quick to criticize and slow to understand, and some of the most damaging attacks don't come from people yelling in your face. They come wrapped in subtlety, in offhand remarks designed to sting quietly, so you replay the moment again and again, like maybe if you analyze it enough, it'll stop hurting. But all it really does is pull you deeper into a place where their opinion becomes more important than your peace. That's the danger. When you take things personally, you give them power they never earned. Because not all criticism is wisdom. Not all insults carry insight. Sometimes people speak not from clarity, but from chaos. Their bitterness, their envy, their shame, it spills out looking for someone to absorb it. And the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more likely you are to try to make sense of it. To ask, did I deserve that? But that question is often the wrong place to start. What if the insult wasn't about you at all? What if their cruelty was just their own pain, disguised as advice or sarcasm or cold indifference? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But here's the nuance most people miss. Sometimes what irritates us isn't something that needs to be understood about us, but understood about them. That the reason it hurts isn't because it's true, but because it touches a wound you were already carrying, and they saw it. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were just carelessly throwing knives and you happened to be standing close. Either way, their behavior is not your burden. The weight is only yours if you pick it up. This is where real self-respect begins, not with fighting back, but with not absorbing what isn't yours. Not every opinion deserves a reaction. Not every insult deserves a second thought. And yet, most of us are trained to internalize everything. We take someone's bad mood and turn it into our failure. We hear one sharp word and decide it defines our worth. But the truth is, their opinion is a reflection of their reality, not a measurement of yours. Hurt people, not always out of malice, but often out of habit. It's the only language they know, and if you don't recognize that, you start speaking it too. You start adjusting your tone, your truth, your boundaries, just to avoid being on the receiving end again. And that's how the spiral forms. You try to earn their kindness. You try to be better. You try to prove them wrong, not because you believe they're right, but because you fear they might be. That fear, that whisper of self-doubt, is what makes the insult stick. But what if instead of proving them wrong, you simply stopped letting them be the judge? What if you reminded yourself that not everyone's voice belongs in the room where your identity is being built? Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." That same truth applies to validation. It's not the absence of approval that weakens you, it's the craving for it. And craving validation from those who thrive on belittling you, that's how your inner foundation cracks. Self-respect is the quiet decision to no longer seek understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Walking away without defending yourself can feel like defeat. Saying nothing can feel like silence is surrender. But it's not. It's protection, it's wisdom, it's strength. You're not here to heal everyone's projections or decode their passive aggression. You're here to guard your peace, and that means learning the difference between feedback and poison. One helps you grow, the other makes you shrink. Don't confuse the two just because they both come disguised as truth. So next time someone says something that stings, pause. Don't react immediately. Ask yourself, is this about me or is it about them? If you have to twist yourself into knots to make it make sense, it's probably not meant to be understood. It's meant to be released. Let their words echo in their own head, not yours. Let their projections stay with them where they belong. Because the moment you start believing that your value depends on someone else's perception, you've already handed them the key to your self-worth. And no one should hold that but you. Respecting yourself in front of toxic people doesn't mean you ignore every critique. It means you learn to recognize which voices speak from wisdom and which just echo their own unhealed wounds. And in that recognition, you reclaim something vital. Not just your peace, not just your clarity, but the unshakable truth that you don't have to prove your worth to anyone who's forgotten their own. You spend hours rehearsing what you should have said. The conversation replays on a loop, every word analyzed, every pause reimagined. Maybe if you had stayed calmer. Maybe if you'd explained your feelings differently. Maybe if you hadn't raised your voice, or worse, stayed too quiet. You think of texts you never sent, letters you'll never write, closure you'll never receive. And deep down, there's this aching hope that if you just get it right next time, if you say the right words, take the right tone, offer just the right blend of understanding and grace, they'll finally hear you, finally see you, finally change. But that's the trap. The more energy you pour into trying to change them, the more of your own power you give away. Toxic people thrive on that cycle. The moment they sense that you need their validation, they become the puppeteer. Your peace, your mood, your emotional weather, suddenly it's all reacting to them. You get used to walking on eggshells, not because you're weak, but because you still believe there's something you can do to fix it, to fix them. But that belief is what keeps you stuck. It sounds noble, kind even, to keep trying. But it isn't compassion, it's captivity. When your well-being is tied to someone else's emotional evolution, you've chained your sense of self to someone who isn't interested in freeing either of you. They know how to keep you hoping. A few kind words after days of cruelty, a brief apology that doesn't lead to change, a moment of vulnerability that makes you believe they just need more time. But time doesn't heal a wound when the knife's still twisting. The hope that they might grow if you just love them harder is the same hope that keeps you shrinking. And each time you justify their behavior as something you can heal, you tell yourself a dangerous lie, that your love is the cure for their chaos, that your understanding will finally be the thing that makes them whole. But it won't, because it never was your job. Epictetus once said, "Some things are up to us and some things are not. Their behavior? Not up to you. Their choices, their healing, their willingness to face themselves, none of it is within your control. And if you make your peace dependent on their transformation, you've placed your power in hands that have already shown they can't hold it with care. You were never meant to carry the full weight of someone else's self-awareness, especially not when they refuse to pick it up themselves. We're taught to believe that love fixes things, that if we're patient enough, supportive enough, selfless enough, we can bring out the best in others. But some people don't want to be better. They don't want understanding. They want control. And they'll take your patience and turn it into permission. They'll use your compassion as a leash, tugging you back every time you try to leave the cycle. And still you stay. Because walking away feels like giving up. But staying is the slow erosion of who you are. You lose your laughter first, then your trust in yourself. Your confidence begins to shrink under the weight of their disapproval. You find yourself asking permission to feel, to think, to set boundaries. And by the time you realize how much you've lost, you're already questioning whether it was your fault. That's how deep it goes. That's how far the illusion stretches. But here's the truth that brings you back to yourself. You don't need them to change in order to be free. You don't need their understanding to heal. You don't need their apology to move on. You only need one thing: permission to stop playing a role in their story and start writing your own. The moment you accept that their growth is not your responsibility, you begin to reclaim everything they made you doubt. You start to feel your own weight again, not as a burden, but as grounding. You start to realize that peace doesn't come from winning their approval. It comes from walking away from the war entirely. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And freedom in this context means choosing not to fight battles that don't belong to you. You don't need to win them over. You need to win yourself back. And that starts with radical clarity. Clarity about what's yours to carry and what was never yours in the first place. When you stop trying to change them, you may feel guilt at first. That's normal. You've been conditioned to believe that love means effort and effort means sacrifice. But real love, real self-respect, isn't about bleeding for someone who keeps handing you the knife. It's about knowing when the most loving thing you can do is let go. So next time you catch yourself drafting another explanation in your head, trying to justify your boundary or soften your truth so they'll finally listen, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking to be heard, or am I speaking because I still think I can fix what isn't mine? Then give yourself permission to stop, permission to be misunderstood, to be unloved by someone incapable of loving with care, permission to be free without needing them to understand why. You don't need closure from someone who never opened up. You don't need peace from someone who profits from your chaos. And you certainly don't need to change anyone in order to feel worthy of the life you've always deserved. Self-respect is the moment you realize that loving yourself means refusing to bargain with people who only offer you pieces of peace in exchange for your whole soul. It's not about changing them, it's about changing what you'll no longer tolerate. And that, finally, is what sets you free. There's a moment that comes after the explosion, after the argument, after the comeback, after you've given them exactly what they wanted, your reaction. You tell yourself you had no choice, that they deserved it, that you stood up for yourself, and maybe, in that split second, it felt like power, like you finally turned the tables. But when the dust settles, something inside you feels off. Not because they broke you, but because you bent. Not because they crossed a line, but because you abandoned one of your own. And that's the subtle betrayal that lingers, the betrayal of your better self. It starts so easily. They manipulate, and you match it. They lie, so you become sharper, more cunning. They play the victim, and you twist the truth just enough to get ahead of the narrative. Not to hurt, but to survive, to protect yourself in a world that doesn't seem to play fair. And yet, each time you do, you step further away from who you are and closer to who they want you to become. Someone reactive, unstable, easy to bait. That's not strategy. That's surrender. Because the real goal of toxic people isn't always to win. It's to make you lose yourself. You feel it in your gut. That moment when you realize you're no longer just responding to them, you're becoming like them. You've adopted their tactics, borrowed their tone, started using their language, and no matter how justified it feels, something sacred gets lost in the process. Your peace, your integrity, your sense of self. And the worst part, you know they see it. You know deep down that your reaction was exactly what they were aiming for, not because they needed to defeat you, but because they wanted to redefine you. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." But this isn't about revenge, it's about respect, self-respect. Because when you mirror toxicity, you don't just tarnish your image in their eyes, you fracture the image you hold of yourself. That quiet pride you used to feel when you walked away from chaos with your head held high, that disappears. And what you're left with is a hollow kind of victory, one that costs more than it's worth. You can justify it, say it was necessary, that they needed to be taught a lesson, that silence would have been weakness. But if winning means becoming someone you're not, what exactly did you win? The truth is, toxic people don't pull you into conflict to defeat you, they pull you in to change you. And the second you play by their rules, you confirm their power. You become another echo in their noise, instead of the calm that could have unsettled them more than any argument ever could. There's something deeply uncomfortable about holding your ground without fighting back, about remaining calm when someone is trying to shake you, about choosing your values over your ego. It feels like losing, like they're getting away with something. But real strength is rarely loud. It's restraint, it's self-governance, it's the decision to walk away, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to protect your character above your pride. We often confuse silence for passivity or kindness for weakness. But what's truly weak is needing to stoop to someone else's level just to feel powerful. What's truly passive is letting your emotions be puppeteered by someone else's dysfunction, And what's truly destructive is pretending that the damage you do in reaction is somehow more righteous than the damage they did in provocation. It's not about who started it. It's about who you become in the middle of it. You can feel the fire rising when you're provoked. That sharp burn in your chest, the quickening pulse, the racing mind. It's a biological storm, a surge of energy demanding to be released. But just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to become it. That gap between stimulus and response, that's your space, that's your power. And in that space, you can choose to be still. You can choose not to mirror the chaos, not because it doesn't affect you, but because you refuse to let it define you. Seneca once wrote, "A good character, when established, is not easily overthrown, but it can be eroded, slowly, subtly, every time you justify stepping out of alignment to prove a point." And those small steps away from yourself, they accumulate, until one day you don't recognize your own reflection, not in the mirror, but in the way you speak, the way you think, the way you treat others when you're angry. That's the real cost. That's what toxic people are after, not your victory, but your erosion. So the next time you feel the urge to match their tone, to win the game by playing it better, pause, not because they deserve your silence, but because you deserve your peace. Because strength isn't proven in how hard you hit, it's revealed in what you choose to protect. And when you choose to protect your values, your energy, your center, you win something they can never take from you, the right to stay you. It's a quiet kind of triumph, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that lets you sleep at night. The kind that builds over time, brick by brick, until one day you're standing in a life that feels clean, untangled, and free. Not because you outplayed toxic people, but because you refused to become them. And in a world that constantly invites you to be reactive, staying rooted in who you are, that's the greatest rebellion of all. Silence makes people uncomfortable. It feels unfinished, unresolved, almost like you've left something important unsaid. That's exactly why toxic people hate it, because silence forces them to face their own noise. When someone insults you, your first impulse is to defend, explain, or retaliate. You want to make them understand. You want to take back control. And yet silence often holds more power than the sharpest reply. Not because it ignores the attack, but because it refuses to feed it. It's not weakness. It's a refusal to enter the ring. You don't lose by being silent. You lose by engaging in battles that were designed to drain you. We've been conditioned to think that not responding means you've accepted the insult, that if you don't fight back, you must be afraid, ashamed, or defeated. But that's not the truth. Silence is not passivity. It's a conscious choice to protect your inner world. It's the art of strategic withdrawal, of choosing your battles with such clarity that others begin to realize they have no power over your peace. When someone throws their worst at you and all they get in return is stillness, that stillness echoes louder than any words you could have spoken. Because it says everything. You don't control me. You don't decide my worth. And you don't deserve my reaction. Toxic people feed on your reaction. They want to see you flinch, explode, defend. Every time you engage, you give them confirmation that they've touched something fragile inside you. They interpret your reaction as a win, even if your words are sharper or more clever. Why? Because you played the game. You accepted the invitation to chaos. And in doing so, you allowed their dysfunction to influence your state of mind. That's not power. That's permission. But silence, that terrifies them. Silence isn't an absence. It's a message. It communicates something they can't twist. Indifference, detachment, peace. And for someone who thrives on chaos, there's nothing more unsettling than realizing they no longer affect you, that their games don't work anymore, that they've lost access to your attention, because once they've lost your attention, they've lost control. Carl Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Silence is the moment you stop looking outward for resolution and start looking inward for clarity. It's the pause between what they say and how you respond. It's the space where you choose your dignity over their dysfunction. That choice, made consistently, changes everything. It turns your silence into a boundary, a firm, unspoken line that tells them where you end and they no longer get to enter. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. You don't need to clarify your intentions to someone who's committed to misunderstanding them. The moment you stop over-explaining, over-sharing, over-defending, you start reclaiming energy that was never meant to be spent convincing others of your worth. And that silence, when grounded in self-awareness, becomes an anchor. It keeps you steady while the storm rages outside. But silence isn't easy. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it often feels like holding your breath while your ego screams to be heard. There's a part of you that wants the last word, that wants to expose their hypocrisy, that wants to be right, and sometimes that desire to be right disguises itself as justice. But what good is being right if the cost is your peace? What victory is worth stepping out of alignment with who you are? Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." How much of your life have you wasted rehearsing comebacks, reliving arguments, giving time and thought to people who never deserved your attention in the first place? Imagine what it would feel like to stop, to see their provocation, recognize it for what it is, and walk away. Not with resentment, but with calm. Not with coldness, but with clarity. Not because they didn't hurt you, but because you decided they don't get to keep hurting you through your reaction. And here's the thing, silence doesn't mean you're not feeling anything. It means you're choosing to feel it without letting it dictate your behavior. It means you can carry the discomfort without unloading it onto someone else. That's emotional maturity. That's restraint. That's self-respect at its highest level, when you don't need to prove a point to preserve your power. There's a kind of quiet strength that develops in people who no longer respond to everything. They move differently, speak less, choose where their energy goes with precision. These are the people who don't rise to bait, who don't flinch at provocation. Not because they're numb, but because they've trained themselves to respond only to what aligns with their values. And in doing so, they become untouchable, not by building walls, but by staying rooted. So the next time someone throws shade your way, resist the impulse to respond. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them sit in the silence they created. Because that silence will speak louder than any justification ever could. And in that silence, you'll hear something else. Yourself, your clarity, your peace, your boundaries, finally held without apology. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to fight to be right. And you don't need to speak just because someone tried to provoke you. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. To breathe, to pause, to stay still, and let your silence remind the world that your peace is not up for discussion. From the moment we're old enough to speak, we're taught to say no gently, add a reason, apologize if you must. Make sure the other person feels okay about your decision, even if you don't, and that lesson sticks. So when someone crosses a line, instead of drawing it clearly, you decorate it with justifications. You try to cushion the impact, to explain why your boundary exists, as if it's up for debate. But when you're dealing with toxic people, every explanation is an opportunity they're waiting for, not to understand, but to argue, to convince you that your limit is unfair, selfish, or dramatic. Before you know it, the boundary you set starts crumbling under the weight of their questions, their guilt, their pushback. You think being nice will make them back off. that if they hear your reasoning, they'll respect it. But people who respect boundaries don't need long explanations. And people who don't, they'll use your words against you. I'm just asking because you said you were tired. You never said that before. You said you weren't sure. See what happens? Your peace becomes a negotiation, something they believe they can shape, influence, or override if they just keep pushing long enough. It's not that explanations are always wrong, it's that with certain people, explanations become loopholes, and they're good at finding them. The more you say, the more they spin. The more they spin, the more confused you feel. You walk away from a conversation meant to protect your energy feeling drained, questioning yourself, wondering if maybe you were too harsh, too cold, too closed off. That doubt, that is their entry point. The truth is, you don't owe an essay to justify your number. Your peace does not require permission. You're allowed to end conversations that feel manipulative. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say, "This doesn't work for me," and leave it at that. It's not rude. It's not mean. It's clarity. And clarity is kindness, especially to yourself. But the reason it feels so difficult is because many of us have worn the people-pleaser mask for so long, it started to feel like our actual face. We've been told that to be kind is to always be available. That to be good is to say yes, even when it costs us something vital. But goodness isn't measured by how much of yourself you let people take. Sometimes it's measured by how firmly you protect what's sacred, your energy, your values, your mental space. Seneca once wrote, "No one can wear a mask for very long. Eventually, the truth will surface. The resentment will build. The emotional exhaustion will spill over. You'll find yourself saying yes with a smile and then feeling sick about it later. And that discomfort? That's your soul reminding you that pleasing others at the cost of yourself is not compassion, it's abandonment." The moment you start setting boundaries without apology is the moment you begin to reclaim your self-respect. You stop filtering your decisions through how they'll be received and start measuring them by whether they protect your well-being. That shift is subtle but powerful. It's the shift from external validation to internal alignment, from needing approval to simply being grounded in your truth. And let's be honest, some people won't like it. They'll call you difficult, cold, selfish, but the ones who benefit most from your lack of boundaries are always the first to object when you build them. That's not a sign to stop. It's proof you're finally doing something different, something healthy, something necessary. You don't need to convince anyone that your boundary makes sense, because the people who truly care about you won't need convincing. They'll listen. They'll respect it. They might not always agree, but they won't try to manipulate it. And that's the difference between someone who's in your life to connect and someone who's there to control. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you can't become who you truly are while constantly shape-shifting to keep others comfortable. Boundaries are how you make space for the real you to breathe. They're not walls, they're doors with locks, and you decide who has the key. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you realize you don't have to explain yourself every time you choose yourself. That choosing rest, space, silence, distance, these aren't signs of selfishness, but signs of self-awareness. You're allowed to not answer the call, to not go to the event, to not reply right away. You're allowed to protect your nervous system without feeling guilty. And anyone who makes you feel bad about that is showing you why the boundary was needed in the first place. So the next time someone presses you for a reason, remember, no is a full sentence. That doesn't work for me is a clear message. You don't need to fill the silence with explanations. Let the silence speak for you. Let your stillness be your stance. Let your peace be protected not by your words, but by your willingness to stand firm without them. And if someone can't handle that, let them go. Because the cost of keeping them is too high if it means constantly sacrificing pieces of yourself just to maintain the illusion of harmony. Real harmony doesn't come from giving in, it comes from standing tall. Boundaries are not about shutting people out, they're about keeping yourself whole. Not everyone will understand that. But the ones who matter, the ones who respect your worth, they won't need an explanation, they'll just get it. And the ones who don't, you'll be better off giving them your silence instead of your energy, because your peace was never meant to be up for debate. There's a moment most people never notice. It comes right after the trigger, right after the insult, the passive-aggressive remark, the condescending tone. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your breath shortens. It happens so fast you don't even realize your body has already declared war. That ancient fire lights up again, the instinct to defend, to retaliate, to make them feel the same sting they just gave you. But buried underneath that rush is a quiet choice, a gap, a space between what just happened and what you do next. And that space, that's everything. In that space, your power lives. Not the kind of power that explodes outward, but the kind that builds inward. The kind that holds, that waits, that remembers. Because right there, in those 3 seconds of silence, you remember that not every battle is yours to fight. Not every jab requires a swing back. Some of them just need to land and disappear. Some of them only exist to see if they can pull you out of yourself. But if you can stay in that space, breathe into it, you take back control, not of them, but of you. Most people never pause long enough to realize they have that choice. They live on autopilot. Stimulus leads straight to reaction. Button gets pushed, voice gets raised, and they call that honesty. They call it standing up for themselves. But what they're really doing is giving the other person full access to their emotional dashboard, letting someone else decide whether they feel calm or furious, grounded or chaotic. And that's not strength. That's surrender disguised as intensity. The Stoics taught that freedom is not found in controlling the world. It's found in mastering the way you respond to it. You can't stop people from being cruel, careless, or manipulative, but you can stop them from making you become cruel, careless, or manipulative in return. That's the shift. Not from reaction to repression, but from reaction to response. From reflex to reason. From chaos to clarity. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and part of that acceptance means recognizing the full range of emotion inside you, the rage, the hurt, the bitterness. You don't deny it, you don't suppress it, but you also don't let it speak for you. You let it rise, then let it settle. That's emotional maturity, not pretending to be unaffected, but choosing not to let your pain take the wheel." In that brief pause, you're doing more than holding back words. You're reclaiming your identity. You're proving to yourself that you are not a mirror, reflecting whatever energy someone throws at you. You are a filter. You decide what passes through. You choose what gets released. And that choice builds something far more powerful than momentary satisfaction. It builds self-respect. The kind that doesn't depend on putting others in their place, but on staying firmly rooted in your own. Sometimes you'll pause, breathe, and still feel the heat, still feel your heart pounding. That's okay. Mastery doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being led by the feeling. You let the wave pass through without grabbing onto it. You let the insult hang in the air without catching it, because once you pick it up, it becomes yours. Once you respond without thinking, you give the situation more life than it ever deserved. And let's be honest, sometimes it feels good to react, to hit back, to say the thing that ends the conversation. But that satisfaction, it fades quickly. What lingers is what you sacrifice to get it. Your calm, your pride, Your ability to look back and say, "I stayed in alignment." Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He didn't say you'd find justice, or revenge, or even peace from others. He said you'd find strength, because that's what it takes, to hold the line inside when everything outside wants to pull you over it. Imagine what would happen if you gave yourself that space every time, just 3 seconds, a breath, a question. What response protects my values? Not what wins, not what hurts them back, not what makes you feel superior, just what protects your values. That's the kind of reflection that rewires everything. That's the kind of reflection that turns reaction into intention. And over time, those 3 seconds begin to shape the way you live. They create distance between you and the chaos, between you and the manipulation, between you and the version of yourself that acts without thinking and regrets it later. That distance becomes a boundary, a calm, invisible force field that toxic people can't break through because they can't reach the part of you that now chooses before it speaks. Seneca once wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." This space between stimulus and response, that's where learning happens. It's where you meet yourself, not the version shaped by stress, but the version shaped by reflection, the one who remembers what matters, even in the fire, the one who chooses not to perform for their amusement, the one who quietly walks away, not to escape, but to remain intact. You don't have to win every exchange. You don't have to prove anything with a perfect reply. Sometimes the greatest statement you can make is the one you never say, because when you speak from the storm, you become the storm. But when you speak from the space, anchored, awake, intentional, you become unshakable. And in a world full of noise, that kind of quiet power is what makes people pause, what makes them listen, and what makes you free. Toxic people are master illusionists. They twist your reality, bend the meaning of strength, and plant the idea that walking away is a kind of failure. That if you were truly strong, you'd stay and fight. That silence means surrender. That peace means you've given up. But the truth they never want you to realize is this: they don't fear your arguments. They fear your absence. They don't fear your anger. They fear your disinterest. The moment you stop needing their attention, their approval, their understanding, they lose control. And for someone who thrives on your distress, nothing is more terrifying than your indifference. You've been taught to believe that letting go is what weak people do, that the ones who walk away are quitters or cowards or emotionally unavailable. But that's the narrative of those who rely on your constant return. They want you tethered, emotionally invested, endlessly hoping for change. And you want closure, you want healing, you want to be heard, to be seen, to be validated. So you stay, you explain, you argue, you try one more time. But every time you re-engage, you step back into their arena, where the rules are always rigged against you. Letting go is not weakness, it's clarity. It's seeing things for what they are instead of what you wish they could be. It's realizing that your time, your peace, your emotional energy are not bottomless. Wells meant to be drained by people who only give back confusion and chaos. The illusion is that your staying will finally create peace. The reality is that your leaving is what peace has been waiting for. You don't need to be understood by someone who chooses to misunderstand you. You don't need to be validated by someone who only sees your worth when it benefits them. And you certainly don't need to keep proving yourself to someone whose power depends on your self-doubt. There is a point when you stop trying to be chosen and you choose yourself. That point is the beginning of freedom. Freedom doesn't always feel good at first. It can feel like emptiness, like loss, like you're missing something vital. But that ache isn't a sign you did something wrong. It's withdrawal from chaos. It's the space left behind when dysfunction finally exits your nervous system. Don't mistake it for regret. What you're feeling is space. And space, when protected, becomes peace. You've probably spent years believing that if you could just communicate better, stay calmer, explain your side one more time, things would be different. That maybe the next version of you, more patient, more forgiving, more evolved, would finally make it work. But relationships built on distortion can't be fixed by self-improvement, because the issue isn't your growth. It's their refusal to meet you anywhere close to it. When you let go, you don't lose. You win something invisible but priceless: self-trust. You win the ability to hear your intuition and honor it. You win back the quiet dignity that comes from no longer needing someone else to see your value in order to believe it yourself. That's not defeat. That's the deepest kind of liberation. And it's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with stillness, with long walks alone, with meals where you're not explaining yourself, with nights where you're not crying into conversations that go nowhere. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." And that's exactly what letting go is. It's not the erasure of a person or a history. It's the revoking of their power over how you feel about yourself. It's the decision to stop assigning meaning to their approval, their presence, their praise. Because once you remove their voice from your internal dialogue, something remarkable happens. You hear your own. Self-respect isn't loud or performative. It's not something you announce. It's how you move, how you stop explaining, how you say no without flinching, how you let people go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. It's how you stop holding doors open for people who walked out a long time ago, not because you don't care, but because you finally care enough about yourself. And maybe the most powerful truth of all is this: you were never meant to convince someone to treat you well. You were meant to walk in such a way that their inability to do so disqualifies them without negotiation. Letting go isn't just about them. It's about reclaiming the energy that kept you attached to a story that didn't serve you. It's about ending a chapter that was draining your potential just to keep the plot going. So when your peace starts to feel heavier than your presence in their life, it's not a sign to try harder. It's a signal to return. Back to yourself, back to your center, and in that return, you'll find a version of you that doesn't need to be chosen because they already chose themselves. That's not the end of the story. That's the part where it finally begins. There's one final truth we often overlook. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate in silence, and by what you reinforce through your presence. Every time you allow a pattern to repeat, every time you excuse what you know hurts, you're writing a script for how you'll be seen. Not because you're weak, but because you care. You want to believe in their better nature. You hope your patience will be enough to inspire change. But eventually, you come to a quiet realization. The longer you wait for someone else to change, the more you risk being changed by them. And not in a way that expands you, but in a way that slowly erodes your sense of worth. You start bending without noticing. You hesitate before speaking. You wonder whether what you're feeling is even valid. That's how emotional erosion happens. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You may still show up with a smile. You may still say the right things. But inside, the weight of what you haven't said, the boundaries you haven't set, begins to accumulate. You shrink so slowly, you almost don't realize it. And that's the danger, when your tolerance for dysfunction becomes your definition of love. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's what many people do. They call it fate. They say, "This is just how they are. This is what love looks like. This is what I deserve." But that's not fate. That's conditioning. That's fear, disguised as loyalty. And the moment you name it for what it is, you start to dismantle its grip. You begin to understand that being kind is not the same as being passive. That being empathetic does not mean being a sponge for someone else's pain. You realize that being emotionally available doesn't mean being emotionally exposed. There's a type of strength that doesn't shout or shake the room. It lives in the quiet decisions you make daily, to respond differently, to step away when it would be easier to stay, to stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to argue. You don't need a grand confrontation to reclaim yourself. Sometimes all it takes is a slow withdrawal, a steady return to your own rhythm. You answer less. You over-explain less. You smile only when you mean it. That's the beginning of real power, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. And here's what you'll discover as you stop trying to win someone over. Your self-respect will stop being conditional. You'll stop waiting for the apology to feel whole. You'll stop needing their validation to move forward, because suddenly the absence of peace becomes louder than the presence of chaos. And when you listen to that, you start honoring yourself in the places where you once betrayed yourself the most. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone. The harm is to persist in one's own self-deception and ignorance. The point is not to be above correction. It's to know the difference between growth and gaslighting, between constructive feedback and emotional manipulation, between truth and distortion. And when that line becomes clear, so does your next step. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to get even. You don't need to make sure they understand. Sometimes closure is choosing to keep the door closed, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. And in that decision, you reclaim all the energy you once gave to confusion, to doubt, to cycles that led nowhere. You become your own center, not guarded, but grounded, not detached, but discerning. And what changes around you is subtle, but powerful. The way you speak becomes more intentional. The way you show up becomes more rooted. You no longer chase people who hesitate to meet you where you are. You no longer romanticize potential. You see people clearly for what they are showing you, not what you're hoping they'll one day become. That shift in vision, seeing reality as it is what protects you. It's what keeps you whole. Let it be known, protecting your peace is not selfish, it's sacred. And you don't need anyone's permission to do so. If someone can't meet you with respect, clarity, and care, then you don't need to meet them halfway. You can love people from a distance. You can forgive them quietly. You can move on without a dramatic goodbye, because healing doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes it just needs one final decision and the courage to keep walking. Not because you're cold, but because you're done setting yourself on fire to keep someone else's comfort warm. Sometimes walking away isn't the end of love, it's the beginning of self-respect. And in a world that constantly asks you to explain, to prove, to endure, choosing peace is the loudest statement you'll ever make. Let go, not to escape them, but to return fully to yourself. If this message stayed with you, there's another video waiting that will take you even deeper into this journey of quiet strength and clarity. Thank you for walking this path with us and for being a part of Stoic Journal.